For the thumbnail drawing exercise, you can use a viewfinder that looks like this that you can make at home using a computer paper. So first, for the thumbnail exercise, I want you to use your viewfinder, or you can use your two hands to create a viewfinder and put it in front of your subject. Find a composition that you like, and depending on the orientation of the composition, draw the shape of the frame that matches to your composition. So I'm looking at this image through my viewfinder, and to make it easier for you to understand, I took a picture of my view through the viewfinder using my iPhone. So in the screen that you see on the left, you're actually looking at an image of the view that I see through the viewfinder. You see the edge of the viewfinder in the image. So maybe this is a strategy that you can use too initially, so that you have a more permanent view of your composition next to you. I do not encourage you to look at the image through your phone all the way through the process though. What I'm doing is I'm just using this image as a reference to create a big mapping or gesture drawing in the beginning. So once the gesture drawing is complete, I'm paying a little bit more close attention to the negative spaces. So breaking down the big negative spaces into smaller sections. When you're not sure which step to take when you're drawing, try to remember the big to small rule. So it's really helpful if you draw big negative spaces or big subjects on your paper first. It's kind of like similar to the building process. So when you're building a building, you start with scaffolding, right? And then put big building blocks first, and then fill in the details. It's the same process with drawing. So I've used gesture drawing, really quick movement on my hand to create a big mapping for my drawing. And then I'm taking a more close look at my subject in real life and adding details to my negative spaces. Now, when you're doing negative space thumbnail drawings, I don't want you to be looking only at the negative space. You really can't do that. So what you should be doing is looking at positive space and negative space together. It will be really hard to look at them both at the same time because of how human perception works. So while you're focusing on positive space, typically the negative spaces go unnoticed. So you just have to practice shifting your perception back and forth. So maybe you can break the drawing process into multiple steps. Maybe you can look at the positive form to do the scaffolding work, which is creating light gesture drawing and mapping on your subject, and then shift your perception to seeing the negative space and redefine the negative space. Start very loose and light in the beginning. So with every layer, you can add slight more pressure and then refine your drawings. Okay, so I've begun shading the negative shapes that I feel very certain about. But the areas that I think will need to be corrected, I kept them loose and light so I can go back and erase at any time. Don't be afraid to use your eraser. Eraser is also another drawing tool. It helps you to subtract the information and values. So you can think of it as like a white pencil in a way. So I'm continuing to find small negative spaces between the dried flowers, and then looking at the large negative space in the background, going diagonally across towards the right upper area. I'm shading those big spaces in. I don't want you to add much details to the positive form. Okay, so let's move on to the thumbnail number 2. Again, I've taken a picture of my setup through the viewfinder as I see it. It's for you to understand better the process. And of course, you can also use this strategy when you do the gesture drawing in the beginning. So I'm keeping my hand pressure very loose and light, and I'm looking at big positive forms and big negative spaces to do quick sketching, a quick gesture drawing. It's almost like when you do the blind contour drawing, spend a lot of time putting your gaze on the subject rather than looking down at your paper. And then put down large marks and large lines that kind of function as scaffolds for your building. Okay, and then once you have the structure down with light gesture drawing, you can go ahead and start defining large negative spaces first. You can also use your pencil with one eye closed, and you can reach out your pencil on your subject and use the pencil as a measuring tool. So what I've done right now is I've measured the ratio from one point on the CAD model to another, and then use that measurement to compare that to another area. Okay, so the details of the positive form are all clustered in the middle in this particular setup, so it was a bit confusing for me, and you notice how I continued adding large structural drawings and tick marks and the structural lines inside the CAD for me to understand the negative space better. And it's okay for you to do this, just do it with light pressure so you can erase the positive space information at any time. The goal of this thumbnail is for you to get the correct placement and find the composition, but without much information in the positive area. Your focus is on shading the negative space. Alright, we'll move on to thumbnail number 3. This time I wanted to try the portrait orientation. So portrait orientation differs from the landscape orientation in that it is taller vertically. Okay, so I've taken the same approach, quick gesture drawing, focusing on the positive form, and then defining big negative spaces first, and then adding details into the negative space and finishing with shading. Thumbnail number 4 is also portrait orientation. So just quickly glancing at my subject, I'm creating mapping. This is more organic form, so I'm using more of this wavy undulating lines instead of straight lines for my gesture drawing. Really quick movement here. and then filling in the negative spaces with more details. And once your placement of subject is more confident, you can apply more pressure on your hand, so the lines and strokes can be bolder. So think of drawing process as layering multiple layers. Start fuzzy and loose in the beginning, so you're just leaving more room for erasing, and then with more definition you can start introducing harder type of leads such as 2B and HB, and increase the pressure. Okay, so this part is optional for all of you, but I wanted to show you how to shade in the negative spaces with ink and brush. This is the same size as the brush you have in your materials list. It's number 10 or 12, I believe. So I just used an empty yogurt container to put some ink, a little bit is fine, and some water. Just dip your brush in ink and then start shading. I like to use one single direction stroke. And this is very similar to how you shade in with graphite or charcoal. I encourage you to outline your edges first and then just fill it in between the spaces. And even though this brush is relatively large watercolor brush, if you use the fine tip at the end, you are able to produce super thin lines. And as you shade in, if your brush becomes too dry, you could just dip your brush, the tip of your brush in the water, put a little bit of water on the tip, and then that helps you to produce more shading without having to dip into the ink again. Okay, with a little bit of water added, the value of the ink will be diluted, but you could also use that to create more expressive shading. Maybe you can use this strategy to create the foreground, the middle ground, the background relationship through your thumbnail as well. And think of the ink shading as like another layer on top of your final drawing. So right now I noticed that something was slightly off with the cat ear part. So I've increased the negative space in that area and corrected the shape a little bit and went over on top of it with ink. Okay, so think of this opportunity as finalizing your drawing, adding last minute detail, and even correcting some mistakes that you might have made in the previous layer. Okay, with ink, the contrast is more noticeable, so it helps you to see the composition better. So if you're willing to, I highly recommend you try this step as well. Okay, so once you're done with your 4 thumbnails on a single sheet of paper, I want you to number your thumbnails 1, 2, 3, 4, and jot down some reflections. It's kind of like a self-critique process. So from the time I started gesture drawing number 2 thumbnail, I didn't like the composition because I thought everything was too clustered. I made that point and jot down reflection for everything and decided number 1 was more successful. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed this assignment.